Hi, everyone. I'm Alberto Fierro, the Consul General of Mexico in Boston, and I'm very glad that you're once again joining us for this series of conversations with Mexicans in New England, where what we want to do is share all the things that Mexican academics, scientists, artists in New England are doing to contribute to culture and science in the US. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Abel Sanchez, and we will be talking about patterns for the future of computer science and innovation. Thank you, Abel, for joining us today, for accepting to join us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be with you here.
It's our honor. Dr. Abel Sanchez is the Executive Director and Research Scientist at the Laboratory of Manufacturing and Productivity at MIT. He holds a PhD for MIT, and he's also the Executive Director of MIT's Geospatial Data Center, GDC. His area of specialty includes the Internet of Things, big data, cybersecurity, and digital innovation. He teaches on those subjects, and for the past 8 years, his research has focused on architecting large-scale computation. So I hope, Dr. Sanchez, that with the conversation, you will help us all understand what all the things I said mean. But first, tell us about what is your background? How did you get to MIT? What is your story?
Sure. So I think to put it shortly, it's quite a common story in the Boston area of the kid that grew up far away from the big cities of the world. I grew up in Northwest Mexico. I had a passion for learning and a passion for academics. And I was fortunate enough that when the time came, I did well enough to get an opportunity. I came to the big schools of the Northeast, to MIT, as mentioned in the introduction. And I was fortunate enough after graduating that I had an opportunity to pursue my career and employment here as well. And it's been a fantastic experience and one that I'm fortunate to have as many in the Boston area that have similar stories.
Carolina?
So Dr. Sanchez, can you tell us what kind of projects do you focus on? Basically, what does large-scale computation mean?
Sure. So overall, the overarching theme is that of applied computation. We live in a world that is becoming digital. It's hard. An interesting conversation to have is what would not be digital. You know, government is becoming digital, education is becoming digital, commerce is becoming digital, and so the application of computation to our world is one of the primary questions that we seek to answer. I work a lot in the field of digital transformation with a lot of the Fortune 100 type companies. I work a lot in the field of education itself, trying to transform ourselves because as universities, we change very slowly, surprisingly, but we do. And also even with governments, I have some projects that are trying to do this within government itself. And it's one of those problems that combines people, it combines processes, and it combines technology. And as such, it's challenging. If you hear it described at a high level, there's great opportunities. Why don't we all just change to that? And we're doing some of that, but it's challenging, and establishing those new ways of working takes time. And so we do it successfully in some places, not so successfully in others. But this is a passion of mine, the world of technology, and seeing the world transform through these technologies is one of the most interesting fields to be in.
Wow, that's really interesting. So as the Consul General previously mentioned, you also work at the MIT GDC. So what does this center focus on? Is it the same digital computation and all that area?
So the overarching theme is the same. A lot of the problems tend to be geospatial in nature, that is location-based services. There's a lot of opportunities around the world to try to understand how things move, change, and share information. So if I were to give you a little bit of context of how computation has evolved, you can think of the dream of Tim Berners-Lee back in the 1980s in the CERN laboratory, where he knew that a few thousand computers had been connected, which seems like nothing. Now, one building, any building downtown has over 1,000 computers. But in those days, around the world, a few thousand computers had been connected. And he was frustrated because he was trying to reach out and connect to other documents of other researchers. However, it was quite difficult to do. You literally had to get on the phone and coordinate with another team as to how to access this document. And so he spends this decade of the 1980s thinking of a way in which you can connect easily to another document. At the beginning of the next decade, the 1990s, he comes up with what becomes the World Wide Web. And by the middle of that decade, 1995, hundreds of millions of documents have been connected. And by the end, we're approaching the billions. This new paradigm changes the world. We're still trying to understand the impacts. We could go across many domains and talk about how those changes have been fundamental. But if we go forward, say from 1995, when the first commercial browser appears, to 2005, we have the second generation of this technology, which would be a Web 2.0, where you're now not just connecting documents, but you're connecting data and you are connecting programs. And so you can start to create new applications with coarser building blocks. Companies like Uber, companies like Airbnb are built from these bigger components, and they can be created quicker and they can be put out to the market faster. And we see the impact of that. Now, 10 years later, we get to what many called a 3.0, and this is the Internet of Things, the physical web, of reaching out one more time. This frustration of not being able to understand our world computationally. First it was documents, then it was programs and data, and then on this third one is reaching out to the physical world and getting information. And so a lot of the work that has been done around IoT has been in trying to understand our physical world, to trying to understand how goods move throughout the planet, trying to understand how supply chains and logistics are made up and can be improved and optimized. And so this is a lot of the problem domain that we work in. And so geospatial data happens to be at the center of this. We talked about the what, where, when, and how, and the what turns out to be, the product, the where turns out to be the latitude and longitude. And perhaps I'm giving you too long of an answer there, but remember, I am an academic, so at times it's hard for me to shorten my answers.
No, this is perfect. And we're learning so much from everything you're saying. I think that understanding the background gives you the entire idea. So thank you so much.
Abel, the GDC focuses on EdTech. Tell us, well, many experts have said that pandemic has pushed several years forward into the use and applications of technology. Education has shifted radically in this sense in the last 7-8 months. Do you believe that teaching platforms we are using today are just the beginning of a new education system? Are they part of this new wave that you were talking about? How do you envision the future of education through EdTech?
So this is another topic that I could speak about for hours.
Good.
I'm very passionate about education and very passionate about technology. And we've seen both the good and the bad during the pandemic. I think one of the surprising things is that if you took your average enterprise prior to the pandemic, 5% of its workforce was connecting remotely. That is, you went home over the weekend or you were sick and you couldn't come in, you would connect through your VPN, your virtual private network, into your corporation, and 5%. Now, during the pandemic, we have the opposite. 95% of the workforce is connected. And so initially in those first months, we struggled with being able to do that translation onto a digital domain. However, one of the dramatic things to call out is that we have managed to do it. That is, for the very first time, it's not just the 5%, now it's the 95% who are connecting remotely, are working day-to-day online, are holding meetings. And when it comes to education, as you rightly pointed out, we have managed to transform fully to online education. And I mentioned also the good and the bad. I know kids in the Boston area who are taking classes online, and they're going online 7 hours a day from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., 7 hours straight on Zoom. You know, I do 3 Zoom meetings and I'm exhausted and I need a nap, right? Now these kids are 7 hours on Zoom every day, which is certainly a challenge. And the reason for a lot of this is that just like in the early days of the web, we tried to do a conversion of the content that we initially had on books to the web. And so the initial pages of the web look like books that had been put onto the web. Today, nothing looks like a book on the web. You know, if you go to the New York Times, or if you go to YouTube, or if you go to any of the other popular sites, the content has been designed for the web. So it's very different than a book format. When it comes to education right now, all we're doing is we're translating the same format that we had in the classroom onto these digital platforms, and it doesn't work. We know very clearly from data that we have collected that a human can't pay attention for more than 7 minutes at a time. And I know as I'm saying this that I'm speaking longer than 7 minutes, and so some of you I will lose, but we can't pay attention for more than 7 minutes. It doesn't mean that you can't go an hour. It just means that every 7 minutes I have to reset your attention. So I have to stop, I have to give you an exercise, maybe I'll show you a video, maybe I'll tell you a joke, maybe I have to do something to be able to recapture that attention again. And so if we're going to deliver content on a new paradigm, we need to reinvent our content. And some of that we had started previously. However, this is a much more expensive proposition, because just because you can teach on a lecture hall doesn't mean you can teach online. Plus, the cost of producing content online is much higher, because then it becomes like a movie. You have your content experts, you have your team that's designing the exercises, you have your production team that improves your videos, and it turns out to be this global operation. And I know because I'm participating in some of these courses, right? And they turn out to be very expensive propositions. So if you think about your average school, they don't have those sort of budgets. And right now, because of the demand and the need, they've had to do that fast conversion, which is really just putting kids online for an hour at a time, 7 hours at a stretch, which is brutal. And of course, nobody can really do that. And so we have huge challenges, but we're just getting started.
So do you believe that these platforms that have been designing this kind of ed tech, like edX, are like the next thing on education? Will universities and high schools will be teaching this way, or should this be adapted to the new normal we're living?
So there's an interesting proposition that's taking place here. The moment you go online, then you start to do comparisons, right? Meaning that if you're taking History 101 or Math 101, say at Harvard or at MIT or at the University of Massachusetts or University of Hawaii, how different are they really? And considering the fact that they all need to be accredited and follow the same curriculum, they are pretty close in content, right? You might have a better lecturer one place or another, but they're pretty similar, which means that if you're not on Harvard's campus and you're not getting the networking experience and the classmates that would come with an elite institution, and you're really just sitting somewhere in a room receiving the same instruction as somebody that is at the University of, I won't say a name, but just think of a, low-ranked university. What value are you getting from that large expense? And for those of you who don't know, it's not unheard of that somebody graduates from an elite college with $500,000 debt, after 4 years plus, say, a couple of a master. And so these are new propositions that are challenging the status quo, right? Because if, as in the case of MIT, a lot of our content ends up online at platforms like edX, or in the West Coast, Coursera and others are picking up the content from Stanford and other universities. What's the value of the residential old school model as opposed to some of these new innovations, right? We can go today on platforms that are, for example, Udemy, and we can get a software engineering course that is tremendous in quality and breadth and content and substance, that hundreds of thousands of people have taken, that you have a verified value, and that are being taught by leaders of industry that are not academics, right? And you can take that course for about $10, you know, tremendous value, right? And so how do we respond to that in academia is one of the challenges, right? There are things that we clearly do well. There are things that we've done well for a long time. We have a great ability to reinvent ourselves, study ourselves, and experiment, right? But there are tremendous challenges in the market. It's not just Udemy and Udacity and, you know, edX and Coursera. There's many others that are appearing in the market. And since January, by the way, there's been about 6 or so called unicorns. And these are the education companies that have been valued at over $1 billion that are in the market. And so they are offering very different offerings, right? And many of them are partnering with some of the elite institutions and are taking on the production and cost and marketing and providing something that is a better value to the markets. Others are going from the bottom segments, or they're going for the top segments. But it's a very different marketplace that has a lot more offerings than the old vanilla. It used to be, you know, you had elementary, middle, high school, and university. Now you're getting a tremendous breadth of different offerings, everything from master classes, right? The so-called master class company, where you can get, you know, a tennis class from Roger Federer, you know, you can't beat that, right? To, you know, the software class at Udemy from one of the Facebook engineers, say. And so we have a much more dynamic marketplace that is responding better to the needs of the market, and that has the potential to transform a lot of the traditional institutions. Again, very long answer, sorry.
And I suppose, and I've heard of several academics that are teaching online now by Zoom, and they were wondering also, what about intellectual rights? When you go to a class and you give a class, you just give the class. But if you produce a Zoom class that might be recorded and could be used again, then universities would have to start dealing probably with intellectual rights, which with the products that you're mentioning, that's already dealt with.
No, absolutely. I have some courses that I have made. I participate in this world, full disclosure. I'm a traditional academic, but I'm also working with some of the companies that are providing these services to, you know, our traditional institutions and that are selling them to the market. And you get royalties, like if you were a musician, you know, if your course is successful, and it's good incentive, right? Because the university benefits, you know, your department benefits, and you also as the inventor, much like if I would have created a new technology and this technology was bought by industry, I would get some percentage, right, of that new invention. In this case, I'm getting new royalties of this new invention that happens to be a class, right? And so it is good for the university, it's good for the academic, it's good for the market if I provide something of value. And so we're seeing this changing marketplace, and where perhaps the opportunities to be able to create a successful course are even better than they were before, because in the past, if you had a successful course, you might get a few more students in the classroom, you might become a little bit more popular in the university, but now you have global reach, right? And you can have it's somewhat close to being able to author a successful book that, you know, has a lot of reach and has benefits for you as well. So this of course is rapidly changing, and it's happening in all the universities at the moment.
Yeah, that's incredible. The only thing it doesn't give is the direct access of the student with the teacher.
And even that part is being handled by some external companies, because there are many models. For example, Paulina mentioned edX and Coursera. A lot of the offerings on these platforms are free, which means that, like you say, there is no access to the professor, right? This is like a book, right? You publish it, you put it out, it has lectures, it has exercises, but that's it. There are some other models, and where there is an organization that is providing that support, and also some internal companies, some internal models. So for example, here at MIT, there is a set of offerings that are offered internally, but for the outside. And the support teams are made up of MIT staff that is dedicated simply to supporting this course. But since it has dedicated staff, then they charge for that course, right? Because it's not just, you know, the content standing on its own, right? And as I mentioned before, there's a number of these offerings, but we're starting to see those models inside. And some of the interesting questions as well are, can the university itself provide the service, or can the external market do that better? Meaning, should the university outsource, you know, the production and support and answering of questions and maintenance, as you know, it's done for other products external.
Wow, interesting changes.
Yeah.
And as you say, the pandemic has had very important contributions. It has pushed us to new places, but also it has lacked of the personal human direct contact. Paulina, do you want to continue?
Yes, of course. So shifting a little bit outside of the edtech, now we're moving, you have worked with different companies in areas like data science. Such companies have been Walmart, Kraft, SAP, and governmental agencies. So some areas of this data science have been polemic because of the use of personal data and privacy. But this is a practice that is widely used by these companies and has a lot of benefits as well. So you may be familiar with the Target case, in which they use data analytics to drive sales and to win more customers, and by analyzing each customer's behavior. This to improve their sales. And so what other kind of uses does data analytics have besides this?
So data analytics, and you know, there's a number of terms that are used. You know, one of them is big data, the other one is data science, the other one is machine learning and artificial intelligence. And all of those are techniques to try to derive information that can be of value. If you're thinking at it from government, that could be valuable to citizens or to, you know, the goals of government. Or if you're in industry, to derive, say, a profit from some of this. Now, some of the challenges that present themselves have to do with representation. We could talk a lot about the challenges that we currently have in our society in representation, in that, for example, if we were to take the role of women in computation, that it's only 20% compared to 80% men. This is something that is well recognized and that we've tried to address. However, we haven't been able to do it yet. And the reason I mentioned this example is because when it comes to the data set that we're making decisions in, how representative is this data set is one of the questions that is often asked. There are, you know, you don't have to be too contrived to be able to identify examples and where this could be detrimental. For example, if you think about a medical scenario and where the data that is making recommendations to a doctor is only looking at a segment of the population, then you could see there the shortcomings that it would have. But in general, this is a problem that we face in our society, as I mentioned. If you think about intelligent cars, you know, most of the intelligent cars are in the area of Arizona, southern Arizona, in the area of Tempe. And the reason for this is because they get more than 300 days of sunshine a year. They have a beautiful grid system and very orderly drivers. And so this is a great place to start your training when it comes to collecting data and making decisions on with your cars. However, this is not ideal if you're going to take that car and say, go to Seattle where it rains 300 days out of the year. Or if you take that car and you come to New England in the middle of winter and you're going to have snow, you can't even see the roads well, right? And so this is an example of somebody that was not trying to do harm with an incomplete data set, but there's just where they are at this point in its evolution and its intelligence, right, when it comes to cars. So yes, we should try to do better. We should make an effort to make our data sets more representative. We should make, strong initiatives, and there's already initiatives by MIT and others on the ethical use of data. But we also have to be realistic about where we are and what that evolution is when it comes to being able to leverage it. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the reasons there's so much attention and interest in it is because you can clearly derive business value. If you think about a car, you can tell, from the data of the road, are you on the right side or not? If it comes into a bank loan, you can compare one bank loan to the other, which one has higher risk and which one has lower risk. And that can guide you in your decisions of approvals of credit, which means that you can improve your ability to make decisions. And likewise, you can determine what language am I speaking. For example, when you start to type in Gmail or in other editors, it can recognize your language and start to give you suggestions based on the spelling on the language that you're using. And so these are all utilities that are going to become more and more commonplace, and they're all based on data. And we have to be careful about our ethical use of this data. But this is something that is quite prevalent today on the tools that we use.
Great, thank you.
Now, tell us about this project that you began several years ago, Beautiful Patterns, that has allowed MIT and Tecnológico de Monterrey to impact 1,000 high school girls. How did you come to this idea? Why, I suppose you already said the very low percentage of women working in computation, but tell us about this. What is the mission, and where is it continuing? Where is it going?
Sure. So growing up in Northwest Mexico, you get to see people with tremendous talent. And I guess it doesn't matter where you grow up, you get to see this throughout your life. People with tremendous talent that don't understand the opportunities that exist in the world and are not given an opportunity to be able to contribute or to pursue those careers that can be so rewarding in many ways. And so as I finished one of the courses that I teach here at MIT, I started to wonder about the possibility of taking this course to Mexico and targeting a demographic that was underserved. And I've looked at this number since a lot more. In the United States, 20 years ago, the percentage of women in computation was 20%. Today, that number hasn't changed, and it's actually a little bit smaller. And if you look at the percentage of minorities within that 20%, it's much smaller. And if you look at of all the numbers of minorities, the lowest of them all, you find Hispanic women. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to try this content, the same content that I teach at MIT, but teach it in Latin America. And of course, being from Mexico, I wanted to try Mexico first. And this is what we set out to do. Now, the very first time that we tried this, we called it algorithmic thinking. You mentioned beautiful patterns, right? And we sent these flyers and we connected with Tecnológico de Monterrey, as you said. And they were very enthusiastic and very supportive. And they promoted this course, and a whole month went by and not a single person signed up. At that point, they said, well, we can't get anybody interested, but if you want to open it up to the men, the boys, they're all interested and we can sell it out overnight. At which point I said, no, give me a chance. Let me try it one more time. And I got together with my graduate students, a group of women, and I said, how could we describe this in a different way? This is something that we're passionate about. This is what we spend our time, our lives working on. We must be able to describe it in a way that's more appealing. And so this is when we came up with the name of beautiful patterns, you know, these beautiful patterns that we love and work with. And we started to change the name of the same. We were not changing the content. We were simply changing the name. We called it beautiful patterns. We presented the problem of the stable marriage algorithm, a Nobel Prize winning algorithm. And we called it how to find a boyfriend. This was the name of the class. And this is, you know, how do you maximize the happiness of a dating pool, right? So you all have somebody you like, right? And depending on who you choose, how could you maximize, right? Because we numbered it 1 through 4. If you get, you know, your first choice, you get a 4. If you get the worst choice, then you get a 1. And how can you arrange this group of people so that the maximum happiness arises? And it turns out to be a classic problem, as I mentioned, the algorithm that addresses this won a Nobel Prize. But if you try to do it just by trying to figure it out and exchanging the preferences, it's really hard, right? And so they work on this problem. Then we came back and we gave them the algorithm, and then they can solve it optimally in, you know, about 5 minutes. And so they start to see the power. And we took many other problems like it. You know, we said how to keep a secret. And behind that, we introduced cryptography. Another problem, a classic problem of computer science, is how do you pack a bag? This is a common thing that many people do. You know, what do you put in a suitcase? How do you optimize things so that they fit better? Again, an optimization problem. But we just changed the way in which we introduced it. And then this course went from no one signing up, not a single person, to it being sold out. And parents of the young women that were taking the course leaving voicemail messages on my phone at MIT, trying to get their young daughters into the course because there was no more room. It was sold out. And this is one of the things that I was most surprised about. You know, as I went to Mexico, I had some concerns. I thought maybe I just tricked this group of young women into taking this course. Once we start to do it, it's going to be 8 hours a day for a full week with women 13 to 17 years old. Maybe they're going to hate it, and this will not work at all. And one of the most surprising things that I've ever seen was the passion, the interest, the engagement that they had. It was just unbelievable. At the end of the day, you know, my grad students and I would sit and we would look at each other and we would just laugh because we couldn't believe the interest that we saw, the passion, you know, that was in those classrooms. And this is why we came back the very next year. We covered about 100 times more. 10 times more. We taught a group of 600, and then the year after that was 2,500, the biggest group that we've taught. And now, of course, we've been faced with the pandemic as with everyone else, and we're trying to develop a fully online program. All of them volunteered by MIT graduate students, female, women's, and that are going to start creating the lessons. And so we'd like to create a full online version for next summer that can be now just not delivered to Mexico, but throughout Latin America. And so these are our goals. They're pretty ambitious. We're sort of working through the logistics. We're working through the platform that we would need. And we're trying to make that big jump onto the online world, bringing with me, hopefully, a lot of the learnings that I've had from EdTech, and trying to create something that would be engaging and effective. And ultimately, as well, in many developing countries in Latin America, provide a viable route for financial independence. If you look at the earning average for a person in Mexico and the software industry, the starting salary is already double the average salary for all Mexicans, which is about 10,000. This would be about 25,000. And if you look at the senior software engineers, they're approaching 40,000, which is about $3,000 or so per month, which is a great salary in most cities in Mexico. And so this is also not just, I think, a great way to incentivize and give women an opportunity and to encourage them to join these fields, but as well a career opportunity, because this is one of those fields in where you can actually join the software industry without having a university degree. Many people go into the software industry from other degrees. So anyway, this is a long story about what our plans are.
Wow. And the girls that participated, were they all students of the Tec de Monterrey or not necessarily, or mostly?
So we try to require, to the best of our ability, 50% from private schools, which would be Monterrey and the similar type of institutions, although most of them came from Monterrey. And then the other 50% from those below the poverty level, which logistically was quite challenging because we needed to provide busing to be able, we held all of our workshops inside of university campuses. And so we needed to provide transportation from most of this population that was on the periphery of the city and bring them in. And as well, it was challenging because you had varying levels of expertise when it came to computation. We might have, say, on one chair, a student that had taken a course already on robotics. And then on another chair, you might have a person that had never used a computer before. And my students shared this with me. He says, I had to spend some time teaching them how to save a file because they've never used a computer before. Now, we split up the classroom not the classroom, but the day into two parts. The morning was what we called algorithmic thinking, or computer science unplugged was the more fun name. And then in the afternoon, it was hands on keyboards at the computer. So in the morning, when it had nothing to do with a mechanical skill, right, or writing syntax, they were all on the same page, meaning there was no disadvantage because this was all conceptual, much like the problem that I mentioned about, how to optimize the happiness of a dating pool. And then in the afternoon, though, the differences did show significantly. But this is just part of the challenge, I think, whenever you have a mixed population in the same classroom. But we try to make an effort to have a good representation across the different socioeconomic classes.
That's fantastic. And the workshops or classes, the week, was it given by you and your students mostly?
So I gave the initial workshop, however, which was one week in Monterrey in 2017. And then by the next year, I didn't teach any of them because also I wanted them to see women, right, in the classroom. And so everybody that went from MIT, a great group of women that volunteer, these are some of the highest earning potential women at MIT because of their industry, right? They can go to Google or Facebook and make great deals of money. They volunteered to go at no charge. Some of them even paid for their own plane ticket because they were so committed to the cause, right? And they taught that whole course by themselves, supported, by the way, by Mexican women also studying computer science. And so by the third workshop, by the way, we had many more Mexican women than we did women from MIT, just because, it's 2,500 young women participating in the workshop, and we couldn't take enough women. And then, our current administration cataloged or recatalogued a lot of the Mexican cities like Monterrey from, a threat level 2 to 3, and that caused all sorts of problems with us being able to take some of these wonderful women from MIT to teach because of security requirements imposed by our institution. But we were still there in person. We still did training, teaching the teachers in Mexico City. And we still had the largest event that we've had right before the pandemic, which was 2,500 in campuses through 21 cities, by the way, in Mexico.
21 cities, wow.
The logistics alone were
Crazy.
yes, exactly. And so, even dealing with sponsors, we had many great sponsors I should recognize: Pemex, FEMSA, Coppel, Softtech, as well as some of the counterparts of American corporations like Google and Amazon and others. Motorola gave us a great grant that supported a lot of the MIT women that went. But just having the conversations with the sponsors was challenging enough. Imagine being able to schedule, 100 young women from MIT flying to the 21 different cities and, coordinating with everything else that was going on. Anyway, we're growing and feeling some of those growing pains, but it was very successful. And again, I think the greatest experience coming back was what I mentioned initially in the classroom, and of these young women from MIT, by the way, from a very diverse background. So you had everything from the woman from Maine who had never left the country to Indian students, Chinese students, Malaysian students, European students, all of them going to Mexico. Again, these very unique talents that are so scarce, and spending 8 hours a day with these young women in the classroom, sharing fully, a lot of great friendships. A lot of these graduates, by the way, even though it's only been a couple of years, already been admitted into great institutions following up on computer science careers.
Wow. And have you been able, or did you think of doing it, some kind of follow-up to know of all those, for example, 2,500 girls, if some of them chose to do a career in a STEM career, at least? Or
So we haven't been able to do it formally, a formal study, just because of our growth and our constraints. However, we have heard of many women that have reached out to us just on their own and have told us. The latest one got admitted into the University of Pennsylvania, and she was going to be studying computer science. Many of them have gone on to the usual universities, Tecnológico de Monterrey, Universidad Panamericana, which is the other one that's pretty big in Mexico City. I guess is La UP, Universidad Panamericana, I guess. And many of them have chosen careers, and there's a lot more to say on that as well, just on the experience of the MIT women when it comes to their career trajectory as well. But fascinating to see how, what kind of impact this has had.
Great. Paulina?
So I would like to ask you, now that you mentioned that having a background or a career in this area gives you better opportunities in the future, would you consider this as an essential part of the curricula for the high school students?
So it definitely needs to be. Now, you can think of it as literacy, right? That it doesn't matter what career you're going into, using digital tools is going to be part of your workplace. In some way, some people think about the race against the machines, right? That we're going to lose out and machines are going to take over and there's not going to be any more jobs. I think about it differently. There's a famous competition that took place at the end of the 90s by Blue Gene, a computer that had been designed for the sole purpose of playing chess, and played then the great grandmaster, the Russian Kasparov. And Blue Gene beats Kasparov, right? In this dramatic first event. Now, ever since, there's been many other things that computers have done that can do much better than humans. However, there's an interesting phenomena that followed that competition the next year, and that's not very much talked about. Everybody came back for a competition, but then you were allowed to use computers. And so Kasparov plays Blue Gene with a laptop, not a supercomputer like the huge computer that IBM had designed to beat him, but just with a simple laptop. And he beats Blue Gene. But the person that beats everyone, it's not even a chess grandmaster. He's just a novice with a couple of laptops. And so many of us point to that and show that the expert by itself is not enough. The machine by itself is not enough. But the human-machine combination, when it's done right, it's better than both. And I think that gives us a great opportunity, and that will, that where that balance is will move over time. But I think that's a great way to think about this problem, because as humans, we can think much more broadly and have much more insights than the narrower definition of problems that computers tend to have. But the question was, is this more important when it comes to career opportunities? definitely. And the answer is that it doesn't matter which field you're in. You know, you could be at MIT, for example, there's a project called Digital Humanities. And one of the biggest projects within the digital humanities is that of history. And if you think about history, you don't think about technology. However, it's nothing but dates and numbers. It's really just data. And so if it's data, it can benefit greatly from everything that we have been talking about. And so it doesn't matter what field you're in, you're going to be greatly benefited by these technology stacks that are now becoming commonplace. And that's one of the common patterns as well, that what used to be sort of science fiction and cutting edge, give it 5 years and it becomes the norm. And that's very much where we are when it comes to artificial intelligence, by the way. Many of what used to take my grad students 2 years to master, now it's available off the shelf. And so, you know, this is just the pattern of technology, right?
Wow. Do you have a final comment you want to share with our audience today?
Sure. I think one of the comments that I would make is that, and this comes from my work in digital transformation. Many people see the advances of technologies and then look at their industries and wonder about how to leverage this opportunity. And transformation is hard. I'll be honest and upfront about that. If you think about work going back all the way to the 1990s, a transformation of any kind without technology is only successful about 40% of the time. That is 60% of the time they fail. If you think about transformations with technology, the failure rate is even higher, as high as 80%. So it's a difficult thing to do. However, it's a very important thing to do, because if you don't, you're going to encounter, and perhaps the best example to give you is that of the world of retail. In a time where if you walk downtown Boston in the Newbury Street area, you see business after business that has gone out of business, and that the retail industry in the United States is going through what is called a retail apocalypse. During this same time, Amazon is having earnings off the chart. It's not just Amazon. Walmart is having earnings the highest they've ever had. Target is having earnings the highest they've ever had. And so those that can manage to transform and leverage the tools that we have today have a tremendous opportunity. And the reason I mentioned Target and Walmart is because they're traditional enterprises that have been around for a long time. They're not like Amazon that was born digital. And so those opportunities exist for everyone. And investing in digital technology and investing in digital transformation. And I'll be more concrete. It's cloud, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, blockchain, and IoT. That handful of technologies is not the only ones. However, it gives you some way to put your arm around what this is, give you some great opportunities that are sorely needed, and that a lot of organizations in Latin America are reaching out to. And so invest, learn. It's a fascinating field. Keep up with it. And rewards are, as I mentioned, for those that are successful in it.
Thank you so much, Abel, for sharing with us your expertise, for inviting us to be a lot more aware of all these developments in technology. Paulina, thank you also for preparing this conversation. And for the audience, we hope to see you again next Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto.